It has taken over a year to share this story, a chapter in Penny's life, the 2024 chapter. Why now? Well, I always promised Penny I would. I promised myself I would in the slight hope of helping someone else take something from this story, and also prompted by February 28th being Rare Disease Day, a day dedicated to raising awareness of rare diseases, including rare autoimmune disorders. So, here we are. I'm being brave. Work with me on this. This is the short version. On January 16th, 2024, it was a long weekend off school. We had a day of practical catch-up activities. Penny wasn't feeling great, so stayed at home for the rest of the day to rest. At dinner that night, she was a little off. She didn't want to eat, a little bit clumsy, 1 minute laughing hysterically at her little sister fooling around, and then the next she was distant. She didn't eat. She watched some of her show, Riverdale, at the time, and went to bed early. At 11 p.m. that night, she started to throw up, and this continued through the night as she transferred down to the basement in search of clean bedding, accompanied by her dad for hair holding and, of course, to keep an eye on her. The following morning, she was weak from throwing up, still distant and exhausted. She'd made her way up to the sofa on the main floor. By 11 a.m, we decided that enough was enough. She was done throwing up, and firstly, we sought advice from her primary care provider. In the UK, this would be the GP equivalent. Their advice was awful, and they were reluctant to see her, so we took her to urgent care somewhere around noon. Urgent care instantly sent us to Emery Johns Creek. Upon arrival, I opened the door, and her right arm was kind of tucked inside the seatbelt. This hit me hard, as I know how claustrophobic we both are, and she wouldn't like that on a normal day. But this was not a normal day. When I went round the side of the car to try and get her out, she could no longer stand. Her right side, her right leg, was no longer working as it should. A stranger saw my struggle and grabbed a wheelchair to help, and I took her in. We waited for what felt like an eternity, but in reality, it wasn't long at all. As soon as we walked into the triage nurse's room, she hit the code stroke button. In that moment, our worlds fell apart and changed forever. Emery were phenomenal. The timeline is a blur, but she had a CT scan instantly, and they confirmed that it wasn't a stroke. They believed that she had ADEM, Acute Disseminated Encephalomyelitis. Penny was airlifted to Children's Healthcare at Atlanta, Scottish Rite Hospital, down in Atlanta. We were not able to join her in the helicopter, and we had to face the perils of the always rush hour Atlanta driving. I vaguely remember this journey. It wouldn't be our last. By the end of January 18th, we got the results of Penny's MRI confirming her diagnosis of ADEM. We breathed again. We were told that 7 days in hospital on high-dose steroids and 3 weeks at home, and she would be just fine. We communicated out to friends and family. We celebrated, we could breathe, and we took it in turns to go home, rest, talk to Willow and Lila, and to reassure them that all would be well. I remember returning to hospital that night to switch John out. Penny was all cleaned up, her hair in 2 cute little braids done by one of the nurses. She looked rested and calm for the first time, as she was previously crawling up the bed in discomfort and confusion. John went home to see the girls and to get some much-needed rest. In the early hours of January 19th, Penny woke up, pulling her hair, telling us it was too tight. She wanted to leave. She was too hot. She wanted to go home. They gave her morphine for the pain, and within 30 minutes her breathing changed. She had a rash, and she was evidently on a scary turn for the worse. The ICU nurse got the charge nurse, who dismissed the change in breathing as a morphine snore, but almost instantly was called back in and exclaimed that something was really not right. It's hard to tell you the timeline of the next events. The room was full, every light was on, and our baby girl was crashing. I was pushed into the waiting room. I couldn't stand, but I also couldn't sit, so I crouched on the floor. If I hadn't, I think I would have blacked out. Someone came through the door, so I took the opportunity to sneak back in. I wasn't going to interfere with the people saving my daughter's life, but I also wasn't going to stand out in the waiting room either. I stood out in the corridor and just stared. I recall looking at how many people were standing around. Some even seemed to be laughing. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't, and maybe it's just how they deal with their jobs and the stresses that come with it. A chaplain came over to comfort me. I was not in the zone to be comforted. I don't know how fast John drove that night. It felt like a lifetime without him, but I don't know how he arrived so fast. Penny was now intubated, critical, but stable. We had that chat with the doctors and the nurses that no parent wants to hear about just how sick your child is. January 19th continued, 1 billion other tests were ran, and she was hooked up to every machine possible. I'm still not quite sure what prompted John to ask this, but he asked them to humour him and run an EKG. Her heart function, as a result, was 18%. This is heart failure. Our baby girl was in heart failure. As a result of this, Penny had a drain inserted into her brain to release the pressure and to prepare her for transport. She was going to be transferred to Choa Eggleston for specialist treatment in the cardiac ICU. We were now entering the realms of heart transplant territory. Another day when we nearly lost her. Another day of chasing emergency crews as we weaved our way along Atlanta lanes of traffic. By this point, some of our family from the UK were already in the air, in what would become a month of support crew switcheroo. My mum and brother were mid-flight, so my sister got the call. John and I travelled separately as we had both cars. I spoke to Joe the entire journey, breaking down when the ambulance passed me en route as we were given a head start. I know that this call will stick with Joe and I forever. Joe trying to calm me down and tell me that everything was going to be okay. I was immovable on the fact that it really wasn't. We were losing our firstborn. The Eggleston cardiac ICU staff were wonderful, but this was a brutal environment. Curtains instead of walls, each patient so desperately unwell. This is where the true battle of head versus heart began. Your brain needs fluid, and a failing heart does not. Treading this fine balance and watching intracranial pressure and heart function. So many machines, monitors, poking and prodding. I still don't quite know how, and to the amazement of all, Penny's heart started to pull through. Penny Campbell, you are one tough cookie. She was transferred out of cardiac ICU onto normal ICU, still within Eggleston, and with the attention turning back onto ADEM and getting that under control. Dates elude me by this point, but one date that does stick in my head is January 24th. Penny was scheduled for plasma exchange, PLEX, also known as plasmapheresis. This is a medical procedure used to treat certain autoimmune or neurological conditions. It involves removing a patient's blood, separating and discarding the plasma, the liquid part of the blood that contains harmful antibodies or substances, and then returning the blood cells with fresh plasma or a plasma substitute. PLEX was an absolute turning point in Penny's health. She would later go on to have another round of this treatment. Penny was extubated on January 30th, 24. If you take one thing away from this, it is not how it's seen on the movies. It is way harder. Penny's recovery window, while still in the acute phase, had started at this point, but it was evident that ADEM had attacked her beautiful brain hard. She couldn't hold her own head up. She had no movement down the right side, couldn't speak, and zero facial expressions. And she was in pain, so much pain down her right leg. After nearly a month in hospital, Penny was downgraded from critical to stable and was approved to move back to Scottish Rite for rehabilitation. The day we left Eggleston, the next round of MRI results came back. I remember words and pointing at the screen, being shown images of Penny's brain in black and white. It wasn't hard for the untrained eye to see some of the areas of damage when it pointed out. I also remember the neurologist saying, "This kid is returning to school no time soon." Now we'll come back to this, as he had clearly never met Penny before all this started. We were transported back to Scottish Rite for inpatient rehabilitation. At that point, she was penciled in for another 5 to 6 weeks stay. In reality, this really was where Penny's true battle of determination started. She couldn't remember the last month. Her baseline was different to ours. She wanted normal, and we were just so happy for her to be alive. February 9th, Penny started her inpatient rehabilitation journey. This was her fight song. This consisted of intense rehab, all whilst in immeasurable pain that still sadly continues to this day. Her rehabilitation continues and consists of speech therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, aquatic therapy, and super importantly, friends and family therapy. I think I'm missing Starbucks therapy and retail therapy, but you know where I'm going. Her room was full to the brim, absolutely full to the brim, with photographs and gifts. We made it as much hers as we could. Penny's stay would see her have a brief break out of the ward down onto a general ward for another round of Plex. Again, a remarkable difference. Oh, and not to forget Daddy nails. Daddy became quite the nail artist. This timeline did mean that Penny spent her sweet 16 in hospital. You know, everyone did their best to make this the best they could for her, but alas, it was not the version of this milestone birthday that she had and had dreamt of. Penny was discharged from rehab on April 4th, 2024 and transferred to day rehab. She got to return home to her own bed and have Bobby dog cuddles for the first time since January. Penny's rehab journey continues. She then attended rehab until May 24th, returning down to Scottish Rite 5 days a week and remarkably ditching the chair quite quickly into this phase. May 25th, graduation day. Willow graduated from middle school the night before, Lila from elementary school that morning, and then it was Penny's turn in the afternoon to graduate from day rehab. We were all dressed up, ready to face this next chapter together. Penny read out a speech that day. She broke us all, in particular my mum and I. Not only the words, but the very fact that she was able to read out loud and clearly these everyday activities, like just speaking, had become massive milestones of achievement. She was doing this. Penny left day rehab that day, stripping off her waist support belt and flinging it defiantly behind her. Her fight song continues, still with endless doctor's appointments, continuation of therapies to help her with movement, speech, vision. Penny remains in so much pain. She wears an ankle support brace, but one thing I'll tell you, remember those words that the neurologist said. This kid is returning to school no time soon. Well, Penny missed an entire semester off school. Yes, I'm bragging now. She was able to play catch-up virtually and with the support and accommodations. She's progressing through this school year with quiet determination, continues to catch up on courses she missed last year, and is looked set to start her senior year of high school back on track. I am astonished by her every day. Penny, you. Yes, I'm talking to you now, baby. We love you. This is the short version of your 2024 chapter. This is not your life story. This is a chapter in your life, and you continue to grab life with both hands. Be beautiful, you, and live life to the full, baby girl. This world is so, so lucky to have you in it.